No one expected the Bering Sea to reveal a secret like this. Not the geologists who had already mapped it. Not the seasoned dredge operators who had spent decades working its floor. And not the industry insiders who believed the richest gold deposits beneath those icy, unforgiving waters had already been discovered and exhausted. To them, it was settled. There was nothing significant left to find. No one expected it, except Emily Riedel. 50 feet below the surface of one of the harshest bodies of water on Earth, in conditions that would force most operations to shut down without hesitation, her dredge pulled up material from a gold deposit so rich and concentrated that it almost defies belief. The numbers don't sound like they could come from a single site in a single season, operated by one person, especially someone critics had long underestimated. $300 million. Not a hopeful projection or a rough estimate based on limited sampling, but a real, measurable deposit sitting just 50 feet beneath the Bering Sea floor. This was ground other operators had crossed, worked, or dismissed entirely. Ground that seemed to be waiting for someone with the right mix of courage, skill, and instinct to stop at precisely the right spot and dig just deep enough. That someone turned out to be a classically trained opera singer from Alaska who chose an unlikely path in one of the most extreme environments on the planet. This is the story of how she uncovered a $300 million deposit that no one else was even searching for, in waters others avoided, at a depth that challenged everything people thought they knew about the Bering Sea's potential. It's one of the most remarkable offshore gold discoveries ever made in that region, and it begins with someone who, by all expectations, wasn't supposed to be there at all. But before the discovery, there was the struggle. Because the Bering Sea doesn't hand out life-changing finds easily, it tests anyone who dares to work it, relentlessly. The test is simple in concept, but brutal in reality. Equipment fails at the worst possible times. Storms appear without warning, turning routine operations into survival situations. Financial pressure builds with every lost day, every costly repair, and every season that falls short of breaking even. And beneath it all, there's doubt. A quiet, persistent voice that surfaces in still moments, asking whether you truly belong in a place like this, whether your background, your resources, and your skills are enough. Emily Riedel heard that voice. Anyone who claims they've worked the Bering Sea and never felt it either isn't being honest or wasn't paying attention. She heard it after breakdowns that cost her weeks of work, time that could mean the difference between profit and loss. She heard it when storms shut her down, just as things were starting to go right. She saw it reflected in others, in the skepticism of those who believed her operation couldn't last. Many assumed the Bering Sea would eventually prove them right, but what they didn't see, and what doubt itself failed to recognize, was what she was building through every difficult season. Yes, she was gaining experience, and in one of the toughest environments on Earth, that kind of experience accumulates quickly. But she was building something far more valuable than that. She was creating a map. Not just a physical one, though she kept detailed records of every location she worked, every reading her equipment produced, and every geological signal she encountered. But a deeper, more intuitive understanding of the seafloor itself. She learned how the Bering Sea floor was formed, where ancient river systems once flowed before being submerged, how and where gold had settled over time, and why. She studied where others had mined, and more importantly, where they hadn't. She began to notice the gaps. Those gaps weren't necessarily empty, they were overlooked. Every difficult season added to that understanding. Every breakdown that forced her to remain in an unexpected location gave her new data. Every storm that held her in place became an opportunity to study sonar readings, analyze charts, and interpret what lay beneath the surface. For years, the Bering Sea tried to break her. What it actually did was teach her, precisely and in remarkable detail, where to look. So when she finally found that $300 million deposit, it wasn't luck. It was the result of years spent learning what others had missed. And that brings up the obvious question: why 50 feet? Why that exact depth in a place so many experienced operators had already passed over without success? The answer lies in geology, specifically the complex and often misunderstood structure of the Bering Sea floor. The geology of the Bering Sea is far more complex and layered than most surface-level dredging operations ever begin to understand. What many people don't realize is that the Bering Sea sits on a continental shelf that, in relatively recent geological history, was actually dry land. During the last ice age, massive amounts of the world's water were locked up in glaciers, causing sea levels to drop significantly. What is now the seafloor was once a vast tundra landscape, crossed by rivers that flowed toward a coastline located hundreds of miles farther out than today. Those rivers carried gold. Just like the rivers in the Yukon and Alaska, these ancient waterways deposited gold along their beds. Over time, the gold settled in bends, slow-moving sections, and along the bedrock, forming concentrated layers. Eventually, as the ice melted and sea levels rose, this entire landscape was submerged, preserving those deposits beneath layers of marine sediment for thousands of years. Most dredging operations in the Bering Sea focus on shallow material, the gold that has been reworked and redistributed by waves and tides over time. This gold is real and has supported offshore mining for decades. But it only represents the surface of a much deeper geological story. At a depth of 50 feet below the seafloor, the situation changes entirely. At that level, you're no longer dealing with recently moved material. You're accessing the original deposits, the untouched remnants of ancient river systems that existed long before the sea covered them. These deposits have remained undisturbed for thousands of years, buried beneath layers of sediment. Emily Riedel understood this, not just as a theory, but as something she could act on. Over years of working in the Bering Sea, she developed a detailed understanding of the seafloor. By combining sonar data, historical geological information, and her own observations from multiple seasons, she identified an area that stood out. The data pointed to a buried paleochannel, an ancient riverbed, hidden beneath the seafloor, in a location that most operators had overlooked. Standard dredging operations never targeted it because they focused on surface-level returns, and this area didn't show promising results at shallow depths. But Emily saw it differently. Based on her analysis, she estimated that this ancient channel lay about 50 feet below the seafloor. Reaching that depth wasn't easy, especially in already deep and challenging waters, but it was still achievable in that specific location. Other operators had passed over the area because the shallow material was thin and not profitable enough to justify the cost of working there. Most assumed that poor surface results meant poor results below. Emily didn't. She interpreted the thin surface layer as a clue that the deeper, older deposits might actually be closer to reach compared to other parts of the shelf, where much thicker sediment layers would make such targets impractical. In other words, she found the sweet spot, a place where the ancient gold-bearing riverbed was deep enough to have been missed by others, yet shallow enough to be reached with the right approach. After years of gathering data and refining her understanding, she positioned her dredge and committed to reaching that 50-foot depth. And that's when everything changed. Working at that depth in the Bering Sea is anything but simple. Conditions become significantly more difficult. Visibility drops to nearly zero due to dense sediment. Communication between the diver below and the crew above becomes more challenging. Equipment is pushed harder, and the risks increase. But Emily had prepared for all of it. Her plan had been carefully developed over months. Equipment was thoroughly checked beyond standard procedures. Dive protocols were tailored for the depth and conditions. Her crew was fully briefed. They knew the goal, the signs of success, and the points where they would need to reassess if things didn't go as expected. When the dredging began, the first material brought up was the heavy, dark sediment that sits above the ancient deposit. To most, it wouldn't reveal much, but to Emily, it was confirmation that they were moving in the right direction. She monitored everything closely. At around 43 feet, something changed. It was subtle, so subtle that less experienced crew members didn't notice it right away. But Emily did. The density of the sediment shifted. The color of the clay changed. The texture became different. These were the signs she had been waiting for. This layer marked the top of the ancient deposit, the indicator that the gold-bearing zone was just below. She immediately communicated with the diver. Just 7 more feet to go. Move carefully. Pay attention to everything. Report changes in real time. Those final 7 feet felt longer than any part of the operation. Not because progress slowed, but because every inch mattered. Every bit of material coming through the system was being examined with intense focus as years of preparation and understanding came down to this exact moment. The crew on deck fell silent, the kind of silence that happens when everyone senses that something important is about to unfold, one way or another. At 50 feet, the diver's voice came through the communication system. He didn't even finish his sentence before saying the word that changed everything: color, gold. And not just small traces like the kind typically found in productive Bering Sea surface material. This was different. The concentration was unmistakable, far richer than anything usually seen at that depth. The diver, experienced and familiar with these waters, knew immediately that this was something extraordinary. The dredge nozzle was pulling material directly off bedrock, rough, uneven, and full of crevices shaped by an ancient river system. These natural grooves acted like traps, holding gold just as a net holds fish. Emily's model had been right. The paleochannel was exactly where she predicted it would be. And the gold within it wasn't just present, it was substantial, spreading across a wider area than even her cautious estimates had suggested. When the first batch from the 50-foot zone was brought up, the collection bag was noticeably heavier than usual. Once processed through the sluice and the gold was separated and weighed, the result was staggering. But Emily didn't celebrate. She went straight to her charts. Instead of reacting emotionally, she focused on the data, calculating, projecting, and scaling the initial findings across the full mapped extent of the buried channel. She ran the numbers once, then again, and a third time. Not because the math was difficult, but because the result was almost too big to accept without verification. Each calculation led to the same conclusion: $300 million. A massive deposit sitting in an ancient riverbed 50 feet beneath the Bering Sea floor, hidden in a place that others had examined, dismissed, and moved past. Emily set down her calculator and looked out across the water that had challenged her for years. This was the same sea that had cost her time, money, equipment, sleep, and certainty, more than enough to force many others to give up. And then she smiled. Not a loud or dramatic reaction, but a quiet, deeply certain one. The kind that comes from finally proving something you believed all along. This discovery wasn't just a milestone in her career. It changed the broader understanding of offshore gold mining in the Bering Sea. Emily had entered the industry as an outsider, a classically trained opera singer with no family history in mining, no established connections, and no inherited expertise. Choosing to build a dredging operation in one of the harshest environments on Earth could have easily ended as a cautionary tale. For years, the industry watched her progress without fully committing to an opinion. She was clearly capable. She learned quickly. She endured setbacks that would have pushed many others out, but survival isn't the same as success. The Bering Sea demands more than persistence. It demands results, and this discovery delivered them. The $300 million find didn't just stand out because of its size. It revealed how Emily thinks, her ability to interpret geological signals differently, to see potential where others saw nothing, and to trust her understanding enough to act on it. This wasn't luck. It wasn't a desperate gamble that happened to pay off. It was the outcome of years of experience, careful observation, and the confidence to follow a well-informed instinct. Beyond her personal success, the discovery reshapes what people believe about the Bering Sea itself. For a long time, the common assumption was that the most valuable deposits had already been found. What remained, many thought, were smaller, less profitable remnants, surface-level material that had already been heavily worked over decades. This find challenges that assumption completely. If such a large deposit could remain hidden at just 50 feet deep in an area that had already been explored and dismissed, it suggests something much bigger. There's more out there. Not necessarily in the exact same place or at the same depth, But the geological principles that led to this discovery apply across the entire submerged landscape. The ancient river systems that once flowed across this region didn't exist in isolation. They spread across vast areas, depositing gold along the way. Emily found one buried channel. There are likely others. And for those who can read the seafloor the way she does, who are willing to take on the added difficulty, depth, and long-term investment required to reach these deposits, this could mark the beginning of a new phase in Bering Sea Gold mining. Finally, there's the personal side of this story. Emily chose this path despite every reason not to. Despite safer, more conventional career options. Despite advice warning her away from the risks. Despite the doubt that naturally comes with repeated challenges and uncertain outcomes. She stayed with it. And in the end, that decision led her to something no one else had found. She chose to stay, to keep learning, to build the knowledge and understanding that eventually led her to that 50-foot depth and to a $300 million discovery. She believed the Bering Sea was worth trusting and that she could be the one to uncover what it was hiding, and she was right. Beneath 50 feet of sediment in the ancient bed of a river buried thousands of years ago, she found proof that every sacrifice, every setback, and every difficult season had been worth it. The Bering Sea tests everyone who works in it. It tests them with freezing temperatures, crushing depth, unpredictable weather, equipment failures, financial strain, and the constant mental pressure of operating in a place that has no regard for human plans or ambitions. Most people, after facing that kind of challenge for long enough, eventually decide it isn't worth continuing. Emily Riedel didn't. She endured the test and passed it. And in return, the Bering Sea, in its own harsh and indifferent way, gave her something rare, a reward that only such a place can offer, a discovery that made it all worthwhile. If you enjoyed this story, consider liking and subscribing to the Timefold channel so you don't miss more stories like this.